What's up, y'all? Welcome back to Bass Fishing Declassified. In this video, I want to share a crankbait that's a hidden gem among the pros that catches a lot of big fish in the fall. Let's get into it. Here's this week's hidden gem. It's the KVD 8.0 Magnum Squarebill. It's by far one of my favorite crankbaits of all time, probably in my top 3. It's caught me so many giant bass over the years. This one's all torn up and grinded in the rocks. And it's a bait that a ton of pros have used and still use over the years, and they just really haven't talked about it. I actually got my hands on one of these baits when they were in prototype from Strike King all the way back in like 2011, and we took it out to Lake Dardanelle on our first trip and caught a couple of really big fish just on some shallow rocky ledges. And ever since, I've been throwing this bait. You've seen me throw it in probably a few different Fish at the Moment YouTube videos. I had one video earlier this year where I doubled up on this bait. I caught some 3s and 4s and absolutely smashed them on some shallow rock piles. And going into the fall, even in early spring and all through the summer, this bait is an absolute fish catcher in the right situation. Compared to a standard KVD Squarebill, you can see this is a KVD 1.5, this bait is really big. It is not a small bait by any means, and it has a really big wobble to it, a really big profile, so it's not going to work on every single lake in every single situation. This KVD 1.5 is by far the more versatile bait. It's going to get you more bites day in and day out, and if you just need a bait to throw around on most days, this is the one to go for. But the reason I throw the 8.0 is because I'm trying to catch better quality fish on areas where guys are throwing a lot of traditional baits, whether that is a Carolina rig, smaller square bills, different smaller crankbaits, even something like a Strike King Series 5 crankbait, which is still kind of like 2/3 the size of this bait. And what happens is that bass a lot of times will be feeding on bigger shad, whether those are big gizzard shad, sometimes even just really big threadfin shad. And when they start getting keyed in on that bigger forage, they really want a bigger profile bait, especially the bigger fish, the 3 to 7 pounders, at least here in Arkansas. That's a really big one, the 7 pounder. And I found that while I'm only going to get maybe 1/3 of the bites I will on this 8.0 compared to that 1.5 Squarebill, I will usually get enough bites throughout the day to make it worth it. Because you can cover so much water with this bait and you can grind it up in that shallow water, you can still get sometimes 10 to 15 bites a day on this bait, which is really cool because for a bait this size, you would think you wouldn't actually be able to generate that many bites. You may just get a couple a day, but you can really actually have a really fun, really good day with this bait in the right situation. So as far as the situation goes with this bait, you really want to have 3 factors. 1, fish need to be setting up in anywhere from about 3 to 8 feet of water. That's the effective depth for this bait. You can fish it up in like 1 foot to 2 foot of water, but it does get hung up a little bit, and then it won't dive much deeper than about 8 feet, especially when you're throwing it on heavier line. I throw this on 18 or 17, 18, 20 pound test, something in that range, fluorocarbon, because you're grinding that thing in the rocks and that line's going to get completely chewed up. So you don't want to be throwing this bait on like 12 pound test. So with that 17 to 20 pound line, you're probably going to be getting max, again, 7 to 8 feet out of this bait. But when those fish are in that depth zone, and they're feeding on bigger forage, bigger shad, sometimes even yellow bass. A lot of times you'll find bass feeding on yellow bass, which this pattern actually works really well with. And those yellow bass are basically just like small white bass looking fish, and the bass will be gorging on them, and you can throw this bigger 8.0 Squarebill through there and catch some good ones. Even when fish are setting up on shallow brush piles and they're feeding on crappie, this bait in more of like a splatterback white or some type of pearl color can catch fish when they're feeding on crappie as well. So whenever those fish are on bigger forage, this bait will work. And it's great because it has the same deflection capabilities of that smaller KVD 1.5. So you can fish it through laydowns, brush piles, shallow rock, shell beds, all kinds of stuff. And it will deflect off cover 95% of the time. You may get hung up every once in a while, but you're also only in about 5 to 8 feet of water, so you can get it back most of the time. Now with this bait, a couple of things from a retrieve standpoint. I have two retrieves that work super well with this. First is just the standard cast it out and reel it in pretty quick. I like to not necessarily burn this bait, but I'm reeling it really a decent speed, probably like 3/4 of my maximum reeling speed. You really want to grind that bait into the rocks. When you grind it and reel it faster, it will come through cover a little bit better as well. If you try to slowly reel it, it will tend to get hung up a little bit more. So I'm usually trying to not burn the bait, but reel it relatively quick. And that's on a 6-to-1 gear ratio reel. This is a Abu Garcia Black Mex 3-to-1 gear ratio reel. Again, 17 to 20 pound test. And I'm pairing that on the Denali Lithium Pro Mag crankbait rod. It's a 7'10" extra heavy moderate action. Moderate action gives it some tip, some bend to it, but it's rated for 1/2 ounce to 2.5 ounce bait. So this bait lands right in that nice range. It's a pretty heavy bait, so you need a pretty long, pretty, I guess not stiff, but extra heavy power, and then that moderate action rod, just so you can cast it and you can drive the hooks home. Now, that one retrieve, just that standard reeling at 3/4 speed, will get the job done 75% of the time. But there are times when this bait actually really shines when you burn it or reel it relatively quick, let it dig into the bottom, and then just stop it. And this bait will rise up, and then you start reeling it again. And you stop it, and you reel it again. So it's kind of like not really like a burn and stop. You don't want to like burn it 3 times and stop it. Burn it 3 times and stop it. It's more like reel it 10 to 15 times pretty quick, then stop your retrieve, let it float up for 2 to 3 seconds, then give it another 10 to 15 cranks of the reel handle, stop it. And I think what happens is these fish will start following this bait, and I've seen this actually on forward-facing sonar. They'll track it for a while, and then when you kill it and stop it, they'll just get all over it. And I always mix that retrieve in about every 3rd cast. So I do 2 to 3 casts with the standard just reeling it in retrieve, and then I'll do that burn and stop on every 3rd or 4th retrieve. And some days they really like that reel and stop, and some days they just want you reeling it in. Now, with this bait, you want to make sure you're not getting too scared of putting it in the rocks and in the cover, because the fish that will bite this are going to be around some type of thick cover. I rarely catch them just out in open water or on flats or just like, normal banks on this. It's usually really thick chunk rock offshore, a really shallow rock pile, around a brush pile, around a laydown, or in a shell bed. Now with this bait, because you have a pretty big bait, the fish are more likely to throw this bait than a standard square bill. There's just more leverage. So you really want to be cautious of your hooks on this bait. I always change out the stock treble hooks because the ones that come on there are just not that great. And I will always switch it out for these size 1 Gamakatsu round bends. And that size 1, I think this is the size 1. There's also the 1/0. You can kind of get away with both on this bait. The size 1 are a little bit smaller, so it'll allow you to fish this bait through brush a little bit better. But if you're not fishing around brush, you can actually go up to the 1/0 hook, which is going to get you a lot better hookup ratio, and these hooks don't get snagged up in the rocks really at all. So if you're fishing around mainly rock, go to the 1/0. Actually, I think that's what's on here right now is the 1/0 hooks. And then the size 1, a little bit smaller with the round bend, they're going to come through brush better. So if you do plan on working this through brush and laydowns a lot, go to one size smaller. I like these round bends rather than the EWGs, just because a lot of times these fish will slap at this bait and there's so much mass to it that if you have the EWG hooks, those fish basically have to engulf the entire bait to get hooked because those hooks are bent in. And that's not always the best because a lot of times these fish are just coming in trying to hit that bait and kill it. But having those round bends on there, you're gonna get more fish hooked up. And then with that more parabolic rod, that moderate action rod that I'm throwing, that Magnum crankbait rod from Denali, it'll have enough give where when the fish get hooked up, they're not gonna be able to throw the bait, but it's heavy enough backbone that you can actually drive these hooks in and throw this bait around all day. So I've messed around with a ton of these setups. I've lost so many fish on this bait over the years trying different hooks. I've tried some of the stouter, like 2X short shank hooks. I've thrown like some 3/0 and 2 and 3/0, like mustad, triple grips, and all kinds of stuff. The owner stinger hooks I've thrown in on this bait. And those really thick hooks, I just lose fish on. I don't think that I'm maybe throwing a stiff enough rod. If you went to a really stiff rod, maybe you could drive those 2x or 3x strong hooks into the fish's mouth, but then you don't have the give when you're playing it, so you could lose those fish. So I go with those size 1 or 1/0 Gamakatsu round bends. That's my go-to hook on it. And I always change out these hooks after about like a half a fishing day, and I'll just change them out. And you can always put these in a box and then come back and resharpen them and then reuse them later. I'll just get like one set of spares, and I'll switch them out halfway through the day, mainly just because this bait's going to be hitting in so many rocks that these hooks will dull out. And because that bait's so big again, and they're swiping at it, it's so easy to lose fish on this bait because they will throw it. And it's really frustrating. I've had so many videos actually where I've had like a 3 to 4 pounder hooked and I lost the fish and it didn't make it into my video. And a lot of times I'll just throw this bait a few casts here and there, but I will get some really good bites. But it's one of those things that I may not have changed out the treble hooks from my last trip. They swipe at it, they just barely get it, and you lose them. But if you have fresh hooks on there on every trip, you won't lose as many fish, and you'll catch some freaking tanks. Now, there are a lot of other Magnum square bills on the market. I've tried a bunch of them. The only other one I like is this Megabass Big M 4.0. The only reason I like it is because it actually has even bigger profile than that KVD 8.0. It's kind of crazy that this Big M 4.0 makes that 8.0 look small. And when those fish are, again, really keyed in on big gizzard shad and they're around rock, sometimes this Big M 4.0 can do the trick. If it's really muddy water as well, this bait just has such a big drawing power that I feel like when I'm fishing around a rock pile or whatever, I might be able to draw some big fish. It's not the best around brush. That lip is kind of narrow on it. So I'll only throw this bait around rock piles, and it's, again, usually in pretty stained or dirty water, 2 foot of visibility or less. This bait will dive anywhere from that same like 4 to 8 foot range. It digs through the rock really well. It doesn't get hung up on rock hardly at all. And you can catch some absolute big ones on this. I also like the stock treble hooks are really good on this bait. They're round bends, don't have to change them out, so that's nice. It is twice the price of the KVD 8.0 though, so I usually throw the 8.0, and 8.0 is a little bit more versatile. But if you do have a situation where you're trying to just go after that one big kicker, that's when I bring out the 4.0, the Big M 4.0. It's confusing because it's 8.0, 4.0. Anyways, a lot of times what I'll do is I'll actually catch my limit on the 8.0, and I'll get 5 for 15 to 17 pounds, and then I'll pick up the Big M 4.0 and I'll throw this the rest of the day, and I'll get 1 5-pound bite that helps me cull out. It's also a good bait if you are just trying to go after one kicker and you're not even throwing this bait and you just want to go after a big bite. This bait will get the job done. It has really loud rattles in it. It has like a one knocker sound, which I really like. And it does have a different sound because that 8.0 is silent. So it draws more attention. It's almost like a glide bait profile, and it like wobbles like crazy. So this is a lot more of a situational bait for me, and it's not something that I would probably pick up 90% of my fishing trips. But if I do find a situation where, again, I just want one big bite and they're feeding on big gizzards and it's dirty water, this is a good bait. There's a few others out there. There's a couple of like depths, crankbaits, and just other baits that I've tried before. I'm not the biggest fan of them because I honestly don't think they offer anything unique or better than the KVD 8.0. This bait is more economical, easier to get, at least it kind of was. I don't know, maybe they're not selling as many of them because they're hard to kind of find. On Tackle Warehouse, you can pick up a few usually, but I have a ton of these things. I think a lot of pros throw them and just don't talk about it. There are a lot of guys I've seen with them on the deck of their boat over the years, or I've talked to them about it and they've stayed really hush-hush about it because it's just a bait that intimidates most anglers, and most guys are just going to go to that smaller square bill. But this bait is just one of my favorites. I can't tell you how effective it is. You just have to pick one up and give it a try for yourself. If you're on a lake with big gizzards, yellow bass, crappie, things like that, the bass are feeding on. If you're on a northern lake up north and they're feeding on like small alewife or perch or something, this bait's probably not going to be the most effective for you. So, it really is a situational bait. But if you're fishing down south, Tennessee River, any lakes in the Ozarks, I've caught them on Table Rock Lake on this bait, Lake Stockton on this bait, caught them on the Arkansas River like crazy on this deal. Even Lake Washita I've caught them on in central Arkansas. So yeah, this bait definitely gets the job done. And that's all I have for you in this video, guys. Hopefully it was helpful and I can share a little bit of a hidden gem. Pick some up. This bait may not be around for that much longer because people are not buying crankbaits apparently. So you may want to pick some up before they go away because it is an absolute hammer bait and you may want to stock up before they're gone. So anyways, thanks for checking out this video, guys. We'll see you on the next one.